When we talk about colonizing the Moon, Mars, and the other planets of the solar system, something we generally like to compare the whole thing to is the colonization of the Americas. The comparisons are pretty easy. The first time we visited, we planted a flag and explored a bit before ultimately coming back. In the second stage, we built semi-permanent outposts that were still very much reliant on supplies from home. And in the third stage, we built proper, self-sustaining economies that rivaled their colonizing countries. But the Moon is a very different place from anywhere we've been before. So how would the process of colonization play out on our next frontier? So first, why do we want to colonize the Moon? After all, space is incredibly inhospitable, and it wouldn't really do much to help us back on Earth, right? I mean, space is cool and all, but once we've come back to the Moon and visited a few times, what will be the appeal in staying there? After all, the last time humans were sent to the Moon was Apollo 17 in 1972. Well, aside from tourism and the whole don't put all your eggs in one basket argument, the Moon actually has a lot of things going for it. First, there are a lot of resources which we could easily get from the Moon, one of which being of course helium-3, which is useful in fusion reactors. Of course, the Moon doesn't have all that many resources that we can't just find in greater quantities back on Earth. But if you're looking at the long game, the Moon's lower gravity makes it very easy to launch new modules and refuel spacecrafts than in Earth's orbit, which will make it much easier to colonize other planets in the future. Of course, looking at the economics of the Moon, although an important part of our decision to go back, is admittedly looking at things a step too far, since we will still have to establish bases to mine these resources and build these spacecraft modules. And aside from bare elements, the Moon has basically nothing for us. You see, while the lack of trees, for instance, might not be much of a problem, considering we won't be building our ships and colonies out of wood, when colonizing the Americas, although the colonists obviously had to bring plenty of supplies with them, those supplies were basically just enough food and fresh water to survive the ocean crossings, which, once they got to their destinations, there was generally enough of to start an outpost right away, in addition to soil to start farming, which, while maybe difficult at first, was a lot easier than it will be on the Moon, and which had already supported native human civilizations, of which the Moon obviously doesn't have any. In addition, said colonists also didn't have to bring their own air with them, seeing as the Americas actually have an atmosphere. In addition, the Moon also has lower gravity, which, while making things much easier to launch into orbit, can wreak havoc on the human body. The Moon is also tidally locked with the Earth, meaning that its day is a month long. And even with good enough curtains to keep out the midnight sun, do keep in mind that that's 2 weeks straight without any sun for solar panels. That all being said, there are easy ways to circumvent the lack of food, water, and air, though admittedly the gravity will be much tougher to deal with. We can harvest hydrogen and oxygen from the Moon itself, which will also be useful for making rocket fuel. We can grow food in our waste Martian style, and speaking of recycling, we can also recycle air and water the way we already do on our space stations. Also worth asking though is why I'm focusing on the Moon in this video, and that is simply because, as a currently just barely spacefaring species, the Moon has a lot of advantages compared to places like Mars and the moons of Jupiter. The main advantage of the Moon, of course, is distance, seeing as the Moon is only 400,000 kilometers away from the Earth, meaning it takes less fuel and far less time to get to. And because these are cosmic distances we're dealing with, the communication delay imposed by the speed of light going one way will only be 1.3 seconds, meaning that real-time communication like video chat is almost completely doable. And live broadcasts are absolutely doable, since live streams are delayed by a few seconds anyway. In fact, since a one-way trip by rocket generally takes about 3 or 4 days, this actually means the journeys will also be much shorter than crossing the Atlantic was by ship. In addition, Earth and Mars are on completely different orbits, and since interplanetary journeys aren't just straight lines, but actually expanding your orbit on one side to where you'll encounter the other planet on the other side when it gets there, this means that you can only send something between Earth and Mars in small windows of time, known as transfer windows. Needless to say, the Moon doesn't have that problem, so if a crew has an emergency and needs either a resupply or to evacuate altogether, it's much easier to do so on the Moon, seeing as it doesn't take long and we can launch pretty much whenever we want, which makes the Moon the perfect place for us to refine the techniques that we use to colonize other celestial bodies so that hopefully we won't have to evacuate them. So now that we've talked about most of the scientific and economic aspects that everyone else usually talks about, more of which you can learn about in Kurzgesagt's video, What will this look like geopolitically? Or, I guess, lunapolitically? Well, first, who would be landing on the moon? As far as countries and space agencies go, NASA already has plans in the works to build a lunar outpost as well as a lunar space station just to make things easier. Japan also plans to land a crewed mission on the moon by 2030, and China plans to follow up by 2036. There will, however, be another player in the new space race: private organizations, in this case including SpaceX and Blue Origin. And this list is just as likely to expand as the list of countries. An easy historical parallel to this might just be the British and Dutch East India companies, who established colonies and trading ports in South and Southeast Asia and quickly became some of the largest companies in world history, which is fitting since space is often touted as the next trillion-dollar industry. Of course, one thing to also bring up is the Outer Space Treaty, a treaty signed in 1967 to forbid the placement of weapons of mass destruction or military bases in space or on other bodies, as well as claiming other bodies or sections of said bodies. There are some holes with the treaty though, seeing as it doesn't forbid the placement of conventional weapons, and countries still have jurisdiction over their spacecrafts. So if a country builds a lunar outpost, the moon could end up looking like Antarctica, where the bases definitely belong to their respective countries, though they might be treated more like ships, although the land they're on doesn't really, even if they claim it. The Outer Space Treaty, however, is a UN treaty, meaning it only truly applies to the countries that have signed the agreement, which does not extend to private organizations. And of course, the treaty might just be rewritten in the future anyway. In fact, as we start colonizing deeper into space, the further our colonies will get from Earth in terms of supplies and communications. If a battle breaks out between two colonies on Titan, it will take over an hour before we on Earth even hear about it. So how would we enforce these laws on places we're just barely able to get to at all? It's tempting to think of our future as a united Earth expanding out into the stars like in Star Trek, but I personally wouldn't hold my breath for a united humanity colonizing the nearby planets and moons of the solar system as one united front. After all, we're nowhere near uniting as a planet, but comparatively just about ready to colonize the moon and Mars. To put it another way, when Europe set out to colonize the Americas, it wasn't so much Europe colonizing the Americas, so much as Spain colonizing most of South and Central America, Portugal colonizing Brazil, England colonizing Eastern North America, France colonizing Central North America, etc. And only just now, 400 plus years later, is the European Union a thing. So, personally, once a couple centuries have passed and the colonies are self-sufficient enough to realistically want independence, I don't think we'll immediately see a united moon either. Just as the Americas broke up into several different countries, so too might the moons formerly American or European or Chinese or Japanese or Indian or Russian or Muskian or whatever colonies each break off into their own separate states, especially considering they'll likely be established with different, often conflicting goals in mind. Imagine pseudo-borders being set up so mining operations don't interfere with scientific operations. The next few centuries will certainly be an interesting time for humanity, as spaceflight gets cheaper and cheaper, allowing potentially more and more people to go to space. Currently, around 550 people have been to space, 5 of whom are currently up there in our semi-permanent outpost, and 12 people have so far ventured to the moon, none of whom are there right now as of June 2020. Although that does sound very nice. I've heard something about Godzilla coming, but I don't want to spoil the rest of the year for you. We are just 1/5 of the way through the 21st century, and already, space is starting to shift from the domain of powerful governments purely interested in science and rocket measuring contests, to the domain of private companies and individuals, and smaller countries interested in everything from science to mining to space tourism. Either way, the 21st century is definitely going to be an interesting ride, that's for sure. Thanks as always for watching. This was admittedly quite a bit longer than my normal videos, but please do let me know if you want to see any follow-ups to this, like perhaps one on how Martian colonization would look like, what with it being a more advanced target to reach. Either way, please be sure to like and share this video, consider supporting me on Patreon, and subscribe to learn something new every Sunday.